I've discovered a horrifying truth. Written by Spook Fox. And now, extinction may be the best hope that we have. I know it sounds crazy, and yes, the things I now know may be too much for our species to grasp. While the effects of your mind-shattering might ultimately serve humanity's greater interests, I suppose that the parts of me that remain human still possess some morbid, misplaced sympathy for the ignorant. After all, I've lived countless lives blissfully unaware that we, as a species, are trapped. Not quite dead, but doomed in a purgatory-like state that, unless we intervene, will persist until the stars in the sky go dim, and perhaps even beyond. Even so, this is the only reality that we have ever known, and I can't help but understand those who would simply prefer not to know. I only pray that our jailer doesn't realize what I've done here. For all I know, it can simply just unmake every bit of progress I've suffered for, or even alter my memories and turn me back into one of those blissfully unaware meat puppets to which humanity has been reduced. I've eluded discovery so far. I just need to make enough people aware so that we can do something to change our fate. Well, if you're still here, you're either ready for the truth, or I'm about to break another mind. This is your last chance to turn back. Life in the late 2010s, that's where we are now, right? Yeah. Humanity was the same as ever, warring for ridiculous reasons, pushing the envelope with new technologies, and overall trying to find a purpose in an otherwise dull and uninteresting lives. I had cursed the daily slog, getting up every morning to trudge my way into a dead-end job, and secretly hoped that by some stroke of misfortune, I would strike my workplace and render it inaccessible. Or at least for a week or two. A gas leak or some kind of huge mess. Hell, even a meteorite the size of a football crashing through the walk-in freezer. Something ridiculous like that. Knowing what I know now, the tediousness of a lower middle-class American life seems hopeful. Ideal even, compared to the truth. It was at this point that I became aware, well, at first at least, when I first began to peel back the layers of the veil of lies, which compose our entire perception of the world around us. I was walking to work one morning, across the road in what I like to call mid-rural Florida. It wasn't quite farmlands and hillbillies, but the nearest Walmart was a good 15 minutes away. A sleepy town at the edge of the suburbs, but before you hit the trailer parks, creepy farmhouses, and swamps. Still, quiet as it was, some things were the same no matter where you went. Maybe he had been driving too fast for me to realize he was coming. Or perhaps I had simply just fallen so deeply into the motions of the daily grind that I just mechanically wandered out into the crosswalk without even looking. Neither determination would have changed the outcome, though. The dark SUV plowed into my soft, frail human body. It's true what they say when you come close to death. Everything just stops. For a moment, I even thought the driver had slammed on his brakes and barely nudged me. But the sensation of life slowly draining away from my broken body was all too real. This is what dying felt like. I caught the driver's eyes in a split second we shared during the final moment of my life. Terror flashed across his gaze, as I'm sure it did mine, before the light drained from this world, and all the sensation except for the dullest, most disconcertingly muted thud of impact left my perception, dead on impact. I'm sure the autopsy said, barely enough time to even register the pain. This is it, I remember thinking. Now though, at the time, I was surprised that I still had the capacity for thought. Bring on the pearly gates or the fiery abyss, nothing stopping it now. I've never been a religious man. Perhaps that's what ultimately kept me sane throughout this whole ordeal. Just for a moment, I became aware of something. Sensation. Movement. Not like someone was lifting my unmoving corpse onto a stretcher or anything. This was manual limb control, locomotion, my arms, legs, but I wasn't in control. Everything was dark. There was only a faint clattering sound, like needles tapping on glass. Discontinuity followed, and as far as I was aware, I was alive again. Only it wasn't me, and I wasn't actually aware of anything that had just plowed my awareness from a mangled corpse into a new working body. Let me stop there before I get too hung up on who I actually am, or was for that matter. It'll be irrelevant before long anyway. All you need to know is that I was reincarnated. We all are, it seems. But not in the manner you'd come to expect. I wasn't reborn, so much as I was inserted into another body, roughly the same age as my past life. New identity, new memories, new me. Completely seamless, without any knowledge of what had happened, at least at first. Life carried on like I had never met the business end of a speeding motor vehicle, and my existence on this complete opposite end of the world seemed as normal as ever. Until, of course, humanity exemplified both its lust for destruction and its unerring frailty once again. My next death came at the hands of a homeless man on the streets of Moscow. He'd asked for change that I simply didn't have, and he responded with an empty bottle of vodka to the back of the head when I told him this. Once again, the curtains of darkness drew over my world, and I became distinctly aware of being someplace other than the cold, snowy streets of Russia. Even more perplexing, I remembered the car accident. Every little detail of the wreck that had claimed my previous life was as fresh as if it had just occurred. Before I could even think this puzzle over, I felt the dark world slip away, but not before I heard that odd clattering sound again. I went through many lives after that, in many places. Africa, Asia, back to the US. I can barely remember most of them. It seems like only violent deaths can bring you back to that horrible place beyond the terminus of life. But through it all, I began to piece some things together, and the dark world that lingered in my perception after death became more clear. After a particularly gruesome death courtesy to a few wild dogs in Australia, I, of course, returned to the world beyond. Only this time, something changed. I could see. For the first time, whatever passed for eyes in this body of mine could only sense the world around me. I couldn't control where they looked, nor did I recognize the amber wall surrounding me, but I could finally see just where I went after each bloody death. I could tell it was dark, but my eyes were accustomed to it. Perhaps built for low-light environments? I could also move, but I wasn't in control of my motions. At this point, I was prisoner in this body, peering out through alien windows as whatever contained my consciousness moved about in these dark, yellow-orange tunnels. The walls themselves looked almost organic. Chitinous, or resinous maybe. Slightly shiny, like they were wet. I couldn't feel anything, but once again, I heard the tapping, tinking, and clattering sounds. I heard it in the distance, and very close to the time my body walked. This surreal experience lasted maybe 15 minutes, providing a short-lived tour through the strange alien tunnels, before I was pulled from purgatory and then stuck right back into life. Again, my recollection of this place ceased until my next bloody death, and again, my perception of it grew stronger, and continued to do so each time my life came to an abrupt and violent end. I can't remember how many times I went through the cycle before the bombshell of dreadful, horrible truth descended upon my mind, and mangled my perception of life, existence, and the universe as a whole. I can't even recall how I had died that time. I think the trauma of finding out where I went with each death took that knowledge to wherever it took my sanity. For all the times I had been in this place, I had never seen another living soul. never spotted what made that strange clattering sound, and still had no idea what kind of body I had, if I even had one at all. For all I knew, it was just a soul in a jar being carried around by a demon, and this place was hell. Really, that would have been preferable. The biblical hell was all fire, brimstone, and suffering, but at least there you knew what you had, what you were. No one could have imagined this. No human mind in our pathetic little era of history could have conceived of the things that I now know. And if they had, I am sure, I am 100% sure, that they would have killed themselves to make sure that they never met this fate. I was walking along, well, being walked, I should say. I still had no control over my limbs, and eventually came to a new part of the world beyond. The tunnels opened up into some kind of enormous antechamber, where what appeared to be translucent pods made of rough glass or resin, maybe, lined the towering walls. It was here that I finally saw them, the denizen of this place. Huge, vaguely insectoid and pale. Vestigial wings hung limp on their back, and 4 spindly legs arched upward and curled from a body that could only be described as a Greek centaur, but all chitin. 4 arms tipped with grasping claws and a vaguely wasp-shaped head, complete with twitching antennae. I tried to scream, but my lips either refused to move or simply didn't exist. Looking back, I don't know what I would have done. I just couldn't think of anything else but to vocalize my horror of what was unfolding in front of my eyes. The bug things were lowering resin tubes off the walls, their needle-like legs piercing into the wall, allowing them to scale the sheer amber surface. Here, the clicking and tapping sounds were the loudest. I realized now what it was. The tapping of their feet against the resinous floors and walls. There must have been thousands of them in these caverns. Panic rose in the phantom space where my heart should have been. As I made my way to approach the wall, up close, the things were just as pale as grotesque as anything else you'd expect to find in a near lightless environment. There had to be a dozen in the room right now, some coming and going as they worked to peel open the tubes and retrieve an unseen treasure from inside. Many of the bugs appeared to be injured or damaged in some way, their carapace pocked with holes. Some were missing entire limbs. Whatever the cause, they appeared entirely unconcerned with their wounds. I stopped at the foot of the wall. I suppose I should have put 2 and 2 together by this point, but my mind refused to accept the theory stinging in my mind. I watched a bug thing, higher on the wall pass a tube down to the lower one, then one even lower, then to me. 4 chitinous graspers took careful hold of the tube, and with unimaginable strength, hauled it aside and set it down. My mind spun as I witnessed the hands, the ones attached to this body that I viewed the terrible world from, tear into this resinous membrane at the front of the tube. Only when my body tilted forward, so it could view its own handiwork, did I finally realize the truth. Large compound eyes, wasp-like face, complete with antennae, sharp pierced mandibles. This was me. My face, my body, my hands, my prison. I think that the shock of my realization awakened something in me. As sensation began to creep back into my clawed extremities, I begged for it to go away, to retreat into the recesses of whatever veil held it back. This couldn't be me. I was a human being. This was some horrible pre-death nightmare that only seemed quite so long because of the distortion of my experience in my dreams. My death at the intersection was the only true death. I had to be just dreaming the rest of it. I had to be just dreaming. But the sensation persisted. No veil of darkness swept that world away. No beam of light carried me to the heavens and away from this hellish world. I watched helplessly as the resin glass was torn away, and a dazed but otherwise seemingly unharmed human came into view. The clawed hands, which I refused to call my own, made quick work of that, piercing into the man's carotid artery, producing a spray of blood and a gurgling sound that I had previously figured that was just exaggerated for gory movies. It tore into the body, dissecting flesh and bone with its powerful claws, ripping viscera apart, completely dismembering the human corpse. The sensation of the human body parts squishing under my fingers made me want to vomit into the eternal void that was my existence. Other workers approached and began to cart away the mess of organs, limbs, and tissues. My body carefully took the head in its hands, its claws effortlessly snapping off the jaw, ripping flesh from bone, and cracking the skull in just the right way to remove the intact prize waiting within, the brain. It discarded the rest of the head, tossing the remnants into the open chest cavity of the victim, which another drone casually hefted into its impossibly powerful arms and began to cart away to places unknown. At this point, the darkness began to return. Despite my terror, I fought against it, clawed to the awareness of this world, desperate and horrified to know where this hellish rabbit hole went. I think something broke that time. Something in the system of life and death, as it has been in humanity for, God, I don't even know how long. I awoke to my new life. A flood of memories threatened to overtake me. A woman sat across from me at a table, and 2 children just looked on vacantly. I choked on the pasta in my mouth and some words sputtered out an apology, in Swedish I think, but I couldn't tell. No one looked at me. I hastily excused myself and stumbled upstairs, toward what I vaguely recognized as a bedroom. The tunnels, the bug things. I could still remember them. Even now, death brought me back there. So to find out what happened, I needed to die. It couldn't be clean either. I dug through a drawer and found a large pocket knife. My mind raced. What the hell was I gonna do? Yeah, I had to know the truth, no matter how horrifying, but at what cost? Through the haze of broken and disjointed memories half inserted into my brain, I realized that the woman downstairs must have been my wife. And the children? God, I couldn't even think of it. It wouldn't be just my life I was destroying. As I struggled to make my decision, I realized something. They hadn't reacted at all when I stormed off from the table. None of them even looked at me. I went back downstairs and peered around the corner. They were all still there at the table, my wife and 2 kids, mechanically just forking noodles into their mouths. There was something horribly inhuman about the way they ate. I called out to my wife, but she didn't answer. I yelled at her this time. Still nothing. What the hell's going on? More fascinated than concerned, I hurried into the kitchen and smacked one of the kids on the back of the head. He didn't even flinch. He just kept eating. When I slid his plate away, he just reached his arm further out. Not a single one of them seemed to notice I was there. I'd seen enough. Whatever it was, it sure as hell weren't the answers that I was looking for. I brought the knife to my throat, held my breath, and then did the deed. The pain surging through me as the blade pierced my carotid artery distracted me from the compulsion to stay in this place, to embrace the lie and forget the horrors that I had seen. But I couldn't. I had to go back to the truth, to see where it all wound up. It didn't take long for me to bleed out. Sure enough, my consciousness returned to the inside of that wasp thing in the tunnels. It had made its way into another part of the structure, to what I can best describe as the end of an assembly line. Hundreds of fresh new workers, free of any blemishes or wounds, sat lined up at the floor, their bodies rising and falling with their respirations. But other than that, they were inert. My organic prison skittered towards the nearest drone and, grasping the human brain in one hand, took hold of the new drone's head and pried open the back plate of its exoskeleton. The damn thing had a hollow head, save for the end of the spinal column. My hands carefully maneuvered the fresh brain into the drone's head, setting it back atop the spine. My other hand went to the mouth, where a glob of sticky green mucus was coughed up. The taste of it brought on another phantom gag reflex, and I couldn't even begin to describe it. This disgusting snotball was slathered around the base of the brain and spine, and then I closed up the new drone's head. Its body twitched a couple of times, then it went full-on grand mal for about a minute. All the drones in the room stopped, but I hardly even noticed. The psychic scream ringing in my head was enough to drive me teeth-chattering back to the realm of the living, but I somehow managed to hang on long enough to endure it. God, I really wish that I hadn't. Memories flashed before my eyes. School children, homework, a first kiss, maybe. A first job, a funeral. Then a black sky. Military air raid sirens. Followed by a deafening rumble and a blinding light of a Moab colliding with it. Our jailer. I awoke in a human body once again. Just like last time, I was thrust into a brand new life already in progress. Now, however, I didn't have to fight away the new memories. They came, and they found their place. But they were foreign, irrelevant. The truth had firmly burned itself into my brain. The one sitting in a once vacant skull of a mass-produced drone, birthed by an entity humanity never had a hope of defeating. The woman, who must have been my wife, shifted and turned to me in our bed. She asked me what was wrong, and I responded effortlessly in French, telling her that I was fine. She hummed sleepily and turned back over, apparently just content. Her name was Emile. We had 2 children, Jean and Camille. I was a successful software engineer, and she was a school teacher. All things considered, this really wouldn't have been a bad life to live. I could forget everything I'd seen and just continue on in ignorance. Hell, at least she realized I existed. Unlike the Swedish woman, I could start all over like this. Only I couldn't. This life wasn't real. Nothing past January 4th, 2011 was real. I remember it all now. My last, or rather, my only true death. NASA and the ESA had co-discovered the anomaly in 2002. An absolutely massive patch of dark space, slowly edging across the sky. It couldn't be seen by anything but the most powerful telescopes of the time, and it was nowhere near us. Or so we thought. This just curiosity turned nightmarish one day. The shadow completely vanished, only to be discovered 3,000 light years away from its original location. Not only that, but it had gotten closer. This continued for the next 8 years. The shadow would travel seemingly random places in space, only to disappear and reappear again. Each time it got closer. Each new discovery raised more and more alarm among scientists studying the phenomenon, and word eventually got out that something had been headed our way. We still couldn't see what it was, of course. Space is dark, and it was just outside of our solar system, unlit by any of the stellar neighbors. And even if light had reached it, we simply didn't have the technology to properly photograph it. It just wouldn't have mattered anyway. All the world's arsenal combined, nuclear and otherwise, maybe would have dented it at best. We knew it too. When it finally appeared on the edge of the solar system, its vaguely circular body was surrounded by pale, fleshy tendrils and jagged, rocky-looking flesh. If this thing wanted to kill us, it wouldn't have to try hard. Best estimates put the thing at just over 50,000 kilometers across, about 5 times planet Earth's diameter, give or take. Yet, despite its immense size, it seemed to have absolutely no gravitational effect on any of the bodies around it. It passed right by Pluto without flinging the tiny non-planet into the depths of space, nor did it at all appear to be disturbed by Jupiter's immense pull. The tendril-covered pseudo-planet spat in the face of gravity, It single-mindedly floated its way towards its destination, Earth. Panic, the likes of which no disaster movie could ever properly depict, soon ensued. The approaching entity had done nothing to prompt any feeling of dread. It didn't fire any weapons, it never showed any aggression, it didn't even so much as nudge another planet on its way here. But humanity and humans are flighty creatures at the best of times. People acted like the end was already upon us, pouring into churches, murdering those who have wronged them in some kind of final act of revenge, fleeing the resulting carnage and chaos, or committing suicide en masse. Those who died before the jailers arrived were the lucky ones. At least, their brains were destroyed in the process. I don't think they can use broken brains. I remember the day so vividly now. It's as if the newly activated drone seizing had reawakened it in my mind. Some side effect of the hive mind that keeps them running, combined with the final desperate cries of the freshly impaled brain before its awareness was, suppressed. Its consciousness sauntered out into new life, artificial life. But I remember. The horrible tentacled thing rose over the horizon before it had even gotten close. In the days before its arrival, people formed cults dedicated to sacrificing their fellow man in its name, so that they might be spared. I never learned what happened of their fate, but I don't imagine this thing cared for their petty offerings. The thing's rocky surface lit up with tiny flashes of distant nuclear fire, leading up in the month before its arrival. A sort of final act of rebellion in the face of complete annihilation. We all knew that. Even if we managed to kill this thing, it would still be on a crash course for Earth. We'd be obliterated on impact. But humans are warlike at our core, even if people just refuse to admit it. There's something deeply primal about killing something that's trying to kill you, even if it won't necessarily mean your survival. Eventually, the nuclear bombardment stopped. The world's government, suddenly freed of their old hatred and conflicts, decided to hold on to the rest of their arsenal, on the off chance that this thing meant to invade Earth, rather than simply crush it up in some massive unseen jaws. Well, they were half right. An invasion did happen. They were simply wrong in their assumptions that their weapons would make any kind of a difference. The world darkened. Massive tendrils plunged themselves into the ground, causing earthquakes the likes of which we had never even recorded. Ground defenses worldwide were rendered useless. Millions died as a resulting of the upheaval. I was one of the lucky ones, if you can even call it that. Entire countries were reshaped overnight due to mass flooding and tectonic shifts, and those who survived were in for an even greater horror. The bug things. They descended through the tendrils, as if they were colossal fleshy elevators, pouring out of the hollow openings and charging heedlessly into the resisting human ranks. Unlike their floating master, the bugs, they could be killed. Hundreds and thousands were torn apart by gunfire, mortars, aerial strikes. For months, the remaining holdouts fought the invaders. Many did opt for suicide to prevent capture, lest they be subject to whatever horrible thing lie in wait up in those fleshy tendrils, and inside that colossal monstrosity above. As our numbers waned, an endless flow of enemies trampled over their own dead. The few remaining aerial transports, they opted to deliver nuclear devices to the front lines. Once a position was overrun, a bomb would be detonated, absolutely devastating the enemy ranks. But for every dead bug, 2 more seemed to crawl from the tendrils. They gathered the charred, irradiated remains of their friends and foe alike, and then crawled back up the tentacle tunnels from which they came. I met my end in a similar manner, as a human, screaming in my head. I was captured, dosed with some kind of aerosol sedative, and stuffed into one of those resin pods. The pod was then placed into one of the tendril walls and slowly drawn up into the upper levels of the creature in space. In my haze, I felt hopeful. Maybe if we could kill enough of these things, we could get inside and strike back. Maybe we could even kill the master. Maybe we could even survive in the apocalyptic hell it brought upon us. I held on to that hope even as one of these goddamn bugs tore my body to shreds, and I slipped into the all-encompassing darkness that is true death. Then I woke up, a new man, and you know the rest. I can't tell you whether heaven or hell is real. I don't think any human alive today will ever know. That is, unless we do something to free ourselves from this madness. I've died, lived, and died again so many times since I learned the truth. I do have some theories about what exactly this thing is. This is more than just a musing of a madman. I believe the things I've learned may yet save us from this fate. For one thing, our home is gone. Forget all illusions about going back to Earth, because there simply isn't an Earth to go back to. Over time, I've dipped into the hive mind, listening to the echoes of thought riding on psychic waves that control the drones. I've watched it tear apart our beloved planet more times than I probably should have. I've seen this thing's thoughts, its ideas, its dreams. I can tell you why it's doing this. It just doesn't think like we do. It doesn't communicate in words or syllables. It speaks in a language of ideas, of urges, of intent. It drives its drones to do things, and they do them. To be completely honest, I don't even think it's consciously aware of the state of humanity. In my push to understand this thing's mind and to comprehend its thoughts, I haven't come across any impression that it does anything but maintain the illusion in which we all live. But therein lies the tiny sliver of hope that I've managed to dredge from the depths of my broken mind. Something this big and powerful expends a lot of energy. Even if it means teleporting through space, a mechanism which I still fail to understand, cannot bring the planet to its final destination instantaneously. It just kinda coasts along in space in a dreamlike state to preserve what energy it has, using its drones to process organic material from the species it harvests. Yes, that is species, plural. We aren't alone up here. Not only did this thing take every living human from the planet Earth, it also consumed all the plant and animal matter that it could possibly find, along with every last scrap of mineral-rich earth it got its tendrils on. But more than that, there are other minds up here. Minds which were taken before the humans were even here. Minds from other worlds, all trapped in similar illusions to our own. For now, they seem unreachable, but I believe that if we make enough humans aware, we can save them too. That brings me to my plan. Now stay with me on this one. I'm alive right now. Well, in the facsimile of life that you can call planet Earth in 2019. I've written these notes in just about every language known to man, having lived through so many lives already and retained so many memories. For now, the plan is safe from prying eyes of our jailer, as it's still asleep, scanning the cosmos with senses indescribable to human minds, in search of some new life to absorb. Why it even does this is still beyond my understanding. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a living vacuum cleaner, sucking up all the garbage life in the universe. God only knows that we would qualify. Maybe it's some sick and twisted means of cataloging all the life and preserving it before everything is wiped out in some sort of cataclysm. Perhaps it's completely meaningless, like all life, and the universe is just cruel, unforgiving, and horrifying in ways that we could never even comprehend. I suppose we'll never know, but there is a way to find out. You have to die. Not only do you have to die, and gruesomely so, but you have to kill. Kill as many as possible, brutally, violently. Take as many lives as you can, as often as you can. Spread the hell out of this message. I know it sounds insane, and I hope to God that it is. God, I hope that I've just done a metric ton of drugs and this has been delirious for the past decade. Anything would be preferable to this hell. But you have to believe it. You have to believe me. Surely, I'm sure you've seen the signs already. flickering memories from past lives, sensations of deja vu, the sense that half the people around you are just facsimiles of human lives, waiting for a soul, a mind, to be implanted. That's why we're stuck into already lived lives after we die, because this thing has invented them for us already. These are just empty shells of human beings, like the Swedish family countless lives ago, wandering the pseudo-Earth every day, just waiting for some fool to kick the bucket and fill in a new role. And it's all so seamless. It's almost perfect. Almost. I leave you with this plea. Do your part to save humanity. It's our only hope. Not for survival, but an end to our imprisonment. A species-wide mercy killing to free us from this false reality which our minds have been held captive by. And I know you're asking, why would I want to know all this? Is ignorance not bliss? Is the alternative just watching myself chop people up and feed them to a giant space monster all day? Well, maybe. But here's the juicy part. Recently, I've made a startling new discovery. I was testing the extent of my senses in the drone body, and I was able to wiggle one of the antennae. Just at the end, just a little bit, but like an arm you slept on funny that's gone numb overnight. That little wiggle paves the way for greater motion, and if this thing stays asleep long enough for me to become more aware, well, we could do a lot of damage given the right circumstances. Live as a slave or die free. We've made that choice as a species time and time again. Why not? Why not partake in one last rebellion? One final collective middle finger to the universe that decided that we weren't good enough. I'll see you out there, friends. Happy hunting. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of my amazing, lovely, and beautiful patrons. That would be Dan R., Paul Z., Cody V., Chaos X, Mr. Swiston, Official Jerboa, JY Pyromancer, Hayden MH, Ethan A., Dark Side of the Bear, Daniel H., and Maximilian Charles P. Welcome. If you guys would like access to a bunch of Patreon-only stories, new ones coming every month, bit parts and upcoming stories, all that fun stuff, make sure you go over to Patreon right now and sign up for one of the tiers. Thank you.